All right, please be seated. I'd like to thank you again for coming to this Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Training course. And for all of you out here and all of you online, thank you for taking the time to come and learn to teach. Hopefully we can all learn how to also practice the peaceful solution in our lives and in everything that we do. Keep in mind that our next class is going to be on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. I'd like to see everybody here again. We're in the self-control unit, and we'll be starting out, well, actually, Catan left off on page 73 last class, and so we'll start on 74, but actually we're going to go back and look at some things first before we get to 74. So let me correct that and say we will be starting at the beginning of the chapter. Let me get there. At pretty much the very beginning, lesson plan 3, page A. This is going to be the note to the teacher. I'd just like to go over this so we can see what we're doing as teachers here and what our plan is and what we'd like to get across to the students. It's very important that we as teachers are also practicing the peaceful solution in our own actions so that we can be an example of this. Let's go ahead and look at Note to the Teacher, Chapter 3, Controlling Your Anger, on Lesson Plan 3, page A. People of all ages have to deal with anger. From the toddler throwing a temper tantrum in the store because he can't get his way, to the adult who is just cut off in traffic. Yes, we all experience anger. Notice we all experience anger. Yet the way many people choose to handle anger today has become dangerous. And that's the thing. We're not saying that you don't get angry. We're going to talk about it a little bit more as we move on here, but as we've been learning, anger is a secondary emotion. There's usually other things that take place first, embarrassment, frustration, etc., that trigger this anger to take place. And anger is just letting you know. It's that emotion that's kind of saying, hey, buddy, hey, you don't really agree with this. It's kind of poking you. It's letting you know that you don't really agree with what's going on. What you do with it from that point is what we're looking at here. We're looking at how to identify. We're looking at how to evaluate the thoughts that come forth and look at the options that you have on how to proceed. We're looking at all these things so we can learn how to control the anger. In other words, we don't want to just lash out like we've learned all our life in the movies or around violent people. We want to handle this differently so that we're bringing forth peace rather than war. And that's one of the things that this particular chapter really is, controlling your anger. It's trying to get war out of us. War out of our minds, war out of our hearts, and war out of our bodies. Completely out of us. That's a job. I'll tell you, that's a job, especially if we're putting stuff in that doesn't click with the peaceful solution. If you're watching violent movies and watching these movies that show people getting even or getting revenge or standing up against the bully and popping him in the mouth or whatever. If you're watching these kind of things and you're agreeing with what's taking place there, you're seeing these things take place, it's going into your heart and mind. And then it makes it that much harder to practice not having war, okay? It makes it much harder to practice peace. So, moving along, so again, we all experience anger, yet the way many people choose to handle the anger today has become, a dangerous situation. From school shootings as a result of bullying and teasing to road rage, gang wars, and even conflicts between nations, which we're seeing a lot of even today. It would be hard for anybody to miss this taking place. And you'd have to have your head so far in the sand. If you're seeing any news at all or listening to what's going on around us, you know that it is just on the brink. The nations are warring against nations, and there's anger and war everywhere. Since everyone experiences the anger, it is a lack of self-control that leads to the inappropriate behavior when dealing with anger. Again, that's what we're working on here, is how we deal with the anger. Anger management skills. Let me just say something. When you think about that word skills, what do you think about? What pops into your mind? Skills. What pops into my mind is that if you're a mechanic, you've got certain skills that you worked at, progressing and building. If you're a carpenter, guess what? You've got certain skills. You know how to read a tape measure. Some might not know how to. You know which saw is the best saw for the job. What size board you need to use for the studs on the wall, and so forth. And a lot of other things that go along with it. It's skills you've built up over a period of time. If you're a singer, think about that. If you're a singer, you don't just walk in one day and someone says, here's a song, sing it for us, and you just bust into it and know it perfectly. It takes practice, and it takes the skills that you've learned in controlling your breathing and controlling your voice and knowing when to slow down and speed up and soften up and get bold. All these things, they're skills that come with years of experience and working at it. If you're an accountant, you didn't become an accountant because you knew how to operate a calculator. Again, you had to build these skills. And you could go into everything, any kind of job that a person might have out there, and there's many more to mention, of course. That's just a small group of them. But remember that word skills. So anger management skills can be learned from a wide variety of sources today. However, most of these are geared towards adults. Today's situation demands that these skills need to be actively taught to our youth as well. And sadly, our youth today are not specifically taught how to handle anger. Not only today, but also yesterday, and hopefully in the days to come that will change. I never, when I went to school, I wasn't being taught how to handle my emotions. When my emotions got out of hand, I got punished for it, but I wasn't taught anything. Was anybody here? I see some of you that are younger than me, some that are older than me. I would venture to say that most school curriculum did not include how to control our emotions, especially not our anger. So the way that people learn, like right here it says, they learn about anger accidentally from the examples of those around them and from the entertainment media. Well, what do you think was learned about anger in the entertainment media? Think about that for a minute. In the movies, on videos, on internet clips, wherever you want to get it from, what do you think is taught about anger when you're being entertained by it? Wouldn't be very entertaining to most people to see someone busting off on somebody and then the other person saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I got in your way," and then turning and walking away. What excitement is that? But it's very exciting. It works on your emotions, and it's very exciting to get even with the bully and, to let that anger flow. He deserved it, That's the kind of thing that is learned in the entertainment media. So, for example, children are watching wrestling on TV, or children who have done this have been known to practice similar aggressive behavior with siblings and peers. And we've all heard about those things in the news where someone got hurt, broke their neck, died, whatever, just from practicing the latest wrestling move that they saw. But the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program takes the approach that learning to maintain self-control in any situation is a large part of positive moral character development. And lesson 3 of this unit, which is what we're on, of course, self-control, focuses on understanding why we become angry and how to recognize our personal anger style. So, see, this is an important thing: is learning how to recognize what we do when we get angry. What is our style of anger? Do we lash out and attack? Do we just, shut up and give the person the silent treatment all the way and just, totally withdraw? What do we do? We're going to look at these things. It provides simple techniques for students to better manage their anger so they can find a peaceful solution to conflicts. And you'd be surprised how many conflicts come up in life on a daily basis where if we're not thinking peace, and if we have all these negative things coming into our mind and our heart from the movies and so forth, you'd be surprised at how many times we actually choose the wrong way. But it's up to us as a teacher. It's up to us to model the right way to deal with anger. Get this, all of you aspiring teachers, me too, all of us, setting a proper example for students to follow. Setting a proper example for students to follow. I was thinking about Catan was in the last class. He mentioned a few things which really stood out, and I thought, and looking at my other the other teachers of the Peaceful Solution that we all know, it'd be great to let me put how I think about it. How I think about it is, what would I do if 2 or 3 of you were following me around all day long, watching every move I make, right? Every choice I make. Seeing the look on my face when something took place, or hearing the tone of my voice when I was frustrated about something. What would I be doing knowing that you were standing there walking around with me? It would be an experience for sure. And so I thought about that, and that's why I highlighted this in here, because I thought it was so very important. Setting a proper example for students to follow. And I might say, I'm not saying anything about the other teachers by any means. I was thinking about myself on this particular thing as Catan. I don't know what it was he said that made it pop into my mind, but when I saw this on the note to the teacher, I said, I got to spend a little bit of time on this. Because you, as teachers of the Peaceful Solution, you should keep in mind that people are watching. If you have students, guess what? They're watching. They're watching all the time. I have young boys correct me sometimes on the things that I do, sometimes the things that I say that might be slightly offensive, or I might have stated something wrong even while teaching class in the Peaceful Solution class. I might have stated something or spoke it wrong, and they don't hesitate to let me know respectfully that I made a mistake. I haven't had any of them just jump out at me disrespectfully saying things, but it's also our responsibility to make sure that every student has the opportunity to develop the basic skills necessary to deal with anger in any situation in a positive, moral way. So it's our responsibility. Remember, responsibility. It's our responsibility. We've got to make sure that every student has the opportunity to develop this. We can't force that development upon them. All we can do is put it out there so that they have the opportunity, and they must choose, just like we have to choose how we conduct ourselves and how we handle anger as teachers of the Peaceful Solution. But I encourage you to think about it that way, is think that someone's following you around, watching everything you do, because they are. How about that? They might not be right there beside you, but everybody's seeing what you do, you know. All right, so let's go ahead and turn over to Lesson Plan 3, page C. And let's be reminded quickly about the purpose of this particular lesson. The purpose is that students will learn how to identify the emotion of anger and how to practice self-control regarding anger. And practicing self-control is, you know, again, building skills. Your skills develop over a period of time as you're practicing this self-control. We want to be very skilled individuals on practicing the peaceful solution, practicing self-control in everything that we do, okay? Now, let's go ahead and turn over to Lesson Plan 3, page D, and look at the procedures real quick. As the teacher, you'll want to look and see, this is a guide for you, to follow a set pattern on how the peaceful solution should be taught. You're probably not going to say it word for word exactly like this says, but nevertheless, it's a guide for you to know what we're looking to do. Now, Catan covered Procedure 6 very well, actually, last time. And as we look, it says, look at the last sentence in Procedure 6. It says, have students complete the exercise found on page 73. Okay. Now, let's look at Procedure 7. Tell students that there are other appropriate ways to deal with anger, and instruct students to read the section Appropriate Ways to Deal with Anger found on pages 75 and 77. Now, you might notice that there's something missing there. Guess what it is? Page 74. Page 74 is missing from the mix. And so does that mean we just pass page 74? No. It's a continuation. It's transitioning from page 73 to page 75. And so let's go on over to page 74. How about? Catan finished up on page 73 with the hot thoughts and the cool thoughts, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Not too much, but a little bit more. If you turn on over to page 74 in your self-control unit, for those of you that are watching on the internet, you can download these books, download the lessons on the. If you're on Facebook, you can download these, and there's other ways also. If you don't have access to it, you can contact the Peaceful Solution, and I'm sure that we'll work very hard into making sure that you have the lessons available to follow along. Okay, so page 74, the top of 74 starts out with, cool thoughts will help you separate from your anger long enough so that you can identify your primary feelings. Now, in the last class, Catan gave a pretty great example of, you're getting off, think about it this way, the hot and cool. You're getting off work, you're all sweaty and everything, your feet are hot, you got these big old heavy boots on, you're covered with cement or something, who knows. But it's, whatever the case might be, you're not really in any mood for any kind of confrontation, right? It wouldn't be a great time. But then you get home, you change clothes, you take a cool shower, get a glass of water, maybe some ice water or something to sit down in front of the fan, and you've got clean clothes on, you're relaxed, and you could handle just about anything at that time. You're being cool, you're being calm. I really liked his example of that, It really stood out in my mind. And so that gives you time to think about things and identify what you've gone through and what you might be going through at that particular moment. So remember, anger is a secondary emotion. Just to cover that for just a second, if you'll turn back to page 58. Page 58. Okay, it starts out on that page 58. No one ever makes you angry. You choose to become angry. That's been covered very well over the last several classes. And look at the second paragraph. Anger is a secondary emotion. We need to remember this. It's a secondary thing. It doesn't just occur, In other words, when someone says something to us that we disagree with, we usually do not feel angry immediately. I mean, that's something that occurs really all the time. People have differences of opinions. It doesn't mean that we're getting all fired up over it. It doesn't occur immediately. Although it might seem as if anger is instantaneous, it's not. Anger is produced by other emotions, such as, and this gives an example of a few, embarrassment, disappointment, hurt, annoyance, and even fear. Anger that's uncontrolled can turn to rage. And that's the part that we're working on, is controlling that secondary emotion of anger. It's real easy to be frustrated or embarrassed. Embarrassment's a big one. Or hurt. Hurt by somebody you trust, somebody you respect, an authority, mom or dad, something in your life. If you can be hurt by things that are done. And that's when we need to really stop and evaluate things and control ourselves, because otherwise it could turn into a really bad situation and we might carry some type of grudge for like a very long time. So let's remember it's a secondary emotion. And when you identify the underlying feeling, you can better control yourself and handle your emotions appropriately. This takes a little working, because you have to, it's like Catan said, you've got to calm down. You've got to, and he gave that example about the differences on even your physical state at the time. You've got to calm down and think about things, and that's the hard part sometimes, is controlling it, controlling your thoughts and your feelings and actions. Let's see, there's page 47. If you look at page 47 for just a minute, I like this example right here, and I like to call it synergistic. It all works together. And really having a starting point, I would choose right there at the top, right between the two arrows, if you will. And you have a incident or a trigger that takes place, right? An incident or some type of trigger. That's something we'll talk about in a minute. Then we have thoughts that start occurring in our mind, and this all goes down so very fast. That's why people think sometimes, well, I just did it, or I didn't think about it, or well, it's instantaneous. Well, no, it's not really, but we can learn to slow it down and calm down. Then we have the feelings, and man, once it hits that feeling stage, oh boy, it's on. It really is. So then we have the actions that come with it, and then, of course, the consequences or rewards that are going to come at the end. So we need to really focus on the beginning of this, on this circle. You can get that picture in your mind, stare at it a little bit. It'll probably help you. But this is as a reminder there. Identify those underlying feelings. Okay. For instance, choosing to respond with anger to cover the fact that you're embarrassed isn't going to change the situation that caused you to be embarrassed. So you're embarrassed at something somebody might have caused, and you think you got to stand up for yourself and show that you're not going to put up with that or something, But it's not going to change the fact that you were embarrassed at that time. And here is a hard, cold fact of life, or a cold, hard fact of life. No one has ever died of embarrassment. There might be some actions that took place afterwards that were brought about, and someone might have died by bad choices and not controlling their emotions. But no one ever died of embarrassment. You didn't get embarrassment and fall over, or embarrassed and fall over dead. It didn't work that way. But statistics show that anger in the form of rage is responsible for thousands of deaths every year, and thousands or millions of imprisonments, No one think about this. If you're able to calm down for a minute and evaluate what's going on with yourself. Evaluate your thoughts and look at these things and evaluate your options. You're not going to sit back and say, well, now that I'm calm, I think I'm going to choose to respond with anger to cover the fact that I'm embarrassed. That's what I'm going to do, yes. Come on. It doesn't work that way. If you're already calmed down and you're thinking you got some cool thoughts taking place, you're not going to sit there and make that irrational choice. You're already calm. You're going to be accepting that it's taken place, and you're going to deal with it rationally. Because to even stop and do this, to even stop and evaluate what's going on with yourself, guess what you've got to be doing? You've got to already be practicing the peaceful solution. It's not something you're going to achieve without practicing the peaceful solution and everything that we've learned up to this point. Think about it. So once you've identified what you are feeling, you've identified it and you know what it is, you now have the opportunity to evaluate those options and decide the best way to handle the situation. Now remember, another word for option is choice. A positive choice is moral, respectful, compassionate, humble, forgiving, and responsible. Wow, that's a lot. You mean I've got to have all that stuff to make a positive choice? Whew. Respectful? Well, so we have to know what respect is, right? Compassionate? You know, a great character trait, a great positive character trait, compassion, being compassionate, being humble, being forgiving and responsible. Keeping in mind that a negative choice is harmful, disrespectful, notice the opposites here, degrading and immoral. Degrading and immoral. If you physically or verbally lash out or plan ways to retaliate at a later time, then you're not making a positive moral choice. I remember a speech I heard recently where there was a mechanic talking about, you know, when someone did something or said something he didn't like and they were leaving his car with him to be fixed. He's like, okay, well, buddy, I'm going to get back at you now. And he would do something on purpose against that individual, against, you know, do something on purpose to their car that would make the car break down or make them have to come back again. I'm going to show you, buddy, you know, that attitude. Now, he said since then, since he's been learning the peaceful solution, he's gotten over that, which is great. I applaud that. But do you know how many people are out there that haven't gotten over that? That do that on a daily basis? Can we look at ourselves and think, have we done that recently? Have we done anything even close to that where we were going to get back? Now, that's a pretty strong example that he gave. But have we done it on like something a little more subtle? Have we gotten back at somebody? Have we set our mind to get even in some way? So, if you physically or verbally lash out or plan ways to retaliate at a later time, then you're not making a positive moral choice. No choice that leads to the verbal or physical abuse of another human being could ever be moral or positive. When you're disrespectful, you're basically stating that you know, this person has no right to be a human being. You really don't even care about them. You know, it's something to keep in mind. That this is important stuff right here. Let me see something here. Let's turn to page 71 for a minute. On page 71, the title of page 71 is "You Are Responsible for Controlling Your Anger." No one can make you angry, and no one can control your anger except for you. And in the same manner, you choose to be angry. You can also choose to handle anger in an appropriate way. Now, if you look over on the opposite page for a moment, you'll see the picture of a puppet on a string. And if you notice the first picture, who's controlling that deal? The puppet has the puppet controlling you. You're now the puppet, or we're the puppet if we allow anger. That's like anger sitting there with the strings on you, and you're allowing anger to control you. On the other hand, if you control your anger in the other picture, if you control your anger, you're the one with the strings. You're the one doing the controlling. That's what we need to work towards. And at the bottom of the page, it says we have the ability to think, reason, and control our thoughts and actions. Therefore, we need to take responsibility for controlling our anger. So learning to handle anger in appropriate ways, well, turn to page, I think page 20 and 20, 20 or 21. On page appropriate ways and positive ways to make these moral choices, but it says to do or not to do, that's the question, and self-control is the answer. And it says another important aspect of proper decision-making is learning to weigh your options, and that's what we're talking about doing. Weighing your options means taking the time to consider the possible outcomes of each choice before acting. Notice that's before acting, and really giving it some thought, and then making the decision that is morally correct, beneficial, and advantageous. A proper decision is made only after you weigh your options. And on page 21, putting it all together, it says you're now aware of the harmful effects of negative thoughts when faced with a negative thought about yourself or others. This is your cue. So it's a signal or an action, this cue. This is your cue to start practicing self-control. And this goes along with triggers. But stopping and thinking about how this can affect you or someone else, and look down at the bottom. A moral choice is not going to affect you negatively or others or property or the environment. And remember the stop sign: stop, think, options, and proceed. Okay. So you can choose to avoid causing, back on page 71, you can choose to avoid causing harm to yourself or to others, and controlling your anger means making a conscious choice not to let your anger get the best of you or not allowing it to turn to rage. Remember, controlling it. By being aware of your anger triggers, now that's the thing right there. A lot of times, when you know you've got this thing that trips your trigger. Remember, you heard that saying, trips your trigger? That's what we're talking about. It's a trigger. It sets something into action, into motion. This trigger does. And it can do it very, very fast, especially if it's something that's built into you over a period of all your life. You've always reacted to it a certain way. Man, when that trigger hits, you can go right into it again. Turn over to page 61 for a moment. Okay, page 61. It says, why do we get angry? That's the question of the day. We often get angry because we experienced something that is unpleasant or our expectations were not met. People get angry for many reasons, and these reasons are called triggers. The trigger starts that process. From a previous chapter, we learned that a trigger causes something to occur. An anger trigger could be something that provokes, frustrates, or aggravates us. A trigger could be a person, a situation, or an experience. On other occasions, it's our own false perceptions that trigger our anger. False perception, because sometimes it can be, you might imagine that something is being done against you, or you might imagine that something's being done that you don't like, We have to be aware of that too. Because we're all unique individuals, what provokes one person might not necessarily provoke another. But it is fair to say that many people experience similar triggers or anger traps from time to time. Let's go ahead and go back to page 71 there. So if you're aware of your triggers, being aware of your anger triggers and your anger style, and remember the anger styles: withdraw, displace, attack. We've got to look at that. I know it's been gone over, but we really need to look at that on page 66 real quick. If you turn to page 66, you see in the illustration the person turning away. They're withdrawing. There's something going on they don't agree with, and they're totally withdrawing from the situation completely. And sometimes people that do that, they hold on to these things for a very long time. Then there's the person that displaces. They displace their anger onto other people or inanimate objects. Look at him kicking the trash can, punching a hole in the wall, breaking out a window, throwing something on the ground in rage. Afterwards looking at it and say, why did I do that? That was my most liked thing, Or the attack, the attacking when angry, the violence that comes forth from these things. And then on page 67, it helps you, and even over on to 68, we're not going to go through it right now, but those are the pages that can help you determine your anger style. It's a question. You should look at that and try to determine what your particular anger style is, so you can know how to deal with it, and we can go back into all these tips on how to handle these things. Okay, so the anger style, and then you can take steps that will lead, back on page 77, you can take steps that will lead to you making positive choices even when you feel angry. Remember, when you disagree with something, you feel that anger. And a cold, hard fact of life is that anger is a part of life. There will always be situations that will trigger your anger. We are learning how to control that anger and not let it turn into rage and doing something that we really would not have done. If we look at page 72, we can start controlling our anger, and we can start controlling it by the way we think. And we can start controlling the way we think by what we put into us. This is why guarding our mind is so very important too. By changing your concept of anger, and now we understand that anger rage is not an example of anger. Rage is an example of uncontrolled anger. Until I started learning the peaceful solution, I didn't really know what anger was. I'd see somebody out of control, hitting someone, throwing something, whatever, and I'd say, oh boy, they're angry. Well, they were angry, but they were also practicing, not controlling their anger, and they were showing it forth through rage. So you can change the way you behave and act when you are angry once you understand the concept of anger. By now, you've grown accustomed to responding to what triggers your anger by reacting in a certain way. That's your anger style. It's what you've learned all your life. So you respond to the anger by either giving someone the silent treatment, internalizing the anger, cursing, lashing out, retaliating, or a combination of all these things. And however you can change your concept of anger by accepting that you don't have to respond with these behaviors anymore. Again, look down there in the highlighted area. Anger simply tells you that something is being said or done that, you don't particularly agree with. Someone else might, but you might not, okay? Okay, so let's look back for just a moment to page 73. Now, page 73, and Catan went over this, of course. Remember the hot thoughts and the cool thoughts. And I just wanted to point out a couple of them real quick, too. If we look at the top, though, but change the way you think by concentrating on those cool thoughts instead of the hot thoughts. Now, this is not an easy thing to accomplish. You got to work at this. It doesn't just occur just because you said that you were going to do that. Remember, the hot thoughts fuel your anger. And And if we haven't learned what our anger, our triggers are and what our anger style is, these things are going to pop in there so fast. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be having the hot thoughts, and you're going to be fueling that anger. It's like pouring fuel on the fire, you know. They can lead to violent and aggressive behavior. Cool thoughts, on the other hand, like was mentioned, you know, after you take a shower and get something cool to drink and you're calm, cool thoughts will help you keep your anger in control. They'll help you avoid impulsive behavior that will enable you to deal appropriately with whatever triggered your anger. And here's two right here that I highlighted and kind of wanted to point out. If you look at the hot thoughts, you know, one of them is, well, somebody needs to slap some sense into that guy. You know, it's like, I think I've heard that recently where someone was doing something pretty stupid and someone said something very similar to that. But a cool thought would be, you know, I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, or something similar. It doesn't have to be those exact words. You might think that, you know, in the course of life, is this really a life-changing thing that's taking place right now? Is this really going to change anything? Is it something I really have to even make a big deal about? If we look on down, one of the hot thoughts would be, oh man, I'm so mad right now. I just don't care about anything, you know. You just lost it completely. You don't care what anyone thinks. You don't care what you're doing. You just want to have that outburst or have that venting and relief. But if you have a cool thought and tell yourself, you know, getting mad isn't going to help. You know, getting your blood pressure up and having a heart attack. Now, people have died from this. They might not have died from embarrassment, but they've most definitely died from this thing right here, where they get so out of control and their face is so red and their heart is pumping so hard and they are just completely out of control. They have had heart attacks and died. And most definitely some of the secondary actions would have been, you know, pulling a gun on somebody and shooting them. And, of course, people have died there. So, you know, keep this in mind. We really need to be able to identify the triggers and identify our anger style, and so we can have the cool thoughts, and we need to guard what we're doing. Turn to page 11 real quick. In fact, we just gotta look at this. On page 11, guarding your mind, and this is so very important. If you're going to practice self-control, you need to be practicing this in your life. It's not going to come unless you're doing this too. It just doesn't work that way. Another key concept in developing self-control, see that? It's a key concept. It's not something you can throw to the side. In developing self-control is to be aware that your actions begin with your thoughts. It's very easy to say, oh, I just did it. I wasn't even thinking. But the truth is that we're always thinking. Thoughts enter our mind at the speed of light, thoughts about ourselves and others and things we need to accomplish and things we want. These thoughts then lead to feelings, which in turn lead to actions or behavior. And it's no surprise that sad thoughts make you feel sad. So how do people act when they feel sad? Well, think about it. When was the last time you were sad? How did you act? Has anybody been sad lately? You know, any hands? Anybody been sad? You know, think about what you did. Think about how you sat around and moped around or whatever. What did you do? Many people mope around or cry. Some just separate themselves from friends and family and kind of withdraw and just go off into a pity party. Kind of go off into a hole. But your thoughts are powerful. Don't underestimate the effect your thoughts can have on your feelings and your behavior. It all begins with those thoughts. It's up to you to determine if your thoughts can help you build character or if they can lead to choices you are going to regret. Look on down, the next paragraph, it says, so how do you know if your thoughts are positive or negative? Well, ask yourself if they're harmful in any way. Remember the STOP acronym, where you stop and you think about it and you consider your options, and you think, is what I'm thinking of doing, is it going to harm myself, others, or property in the environment? Is this going to be bad for somebody? Is it going to be bad for someone down the line? It takes a lot of thought. And to enable the positive thoughts and the ability to sit back and do that, you've got to guard your mind. And that's what I was getting at. If you've got negative thoughts that are being fed into your mind, what goes in comes out. If you've got that going on, then it's so much easier with these negative thoughts. It's easier to have the hateful and revengeful and selfish thoughts. And that's one of the things we're trying to do, is get away from this I thing, which we're going to look at on the next page for a moment. But let's see if I want to go here. Let's look back on page 46 for just a minute. On page 46, so applying self-control to your emotions, controlling your full range of emotions requires you to examine your thoughts, to evaluate what you're thinking and feeling, and then you need to respond in a way that's controlled, well-planned, and respectful regardless of how you feel. Evaluating what you're thinking and feeling, stopping and thinking about it, and having a clear mind to do so, to evaluate that, having the knowledge in you of the peaceful solution. There was a man that came to me several times. And not just him, but there's been a few. But this one particular man used to come and say, on page 72 of the character unit, and I'm just giving an example at random here. On page 72 of the character unit, where the second paragraph says blah 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 blah, and I say, no, no, I don't. And he'd look at me funny and say, you mean you don't know? Now, I'm sure I could have turned that around and picked out some other paragraph on some other page that he might not have known also. But he had that particular thing memorized and was wanting to see if I had that particular thing memorized too. But what I told him was, I said, the thing about the peaceful solution is, this is an ongoing thing. You don't just read it one time and use your rote memory abilities to memorize this thing and then you know it and you live it. It doesn't work that way. I said, this is an ongoing thing. You have to live this in your life. And so that page 72 and that particular paragraph you're talking about, are you living that in your life? If you ask me a question, I can take you to where in the book that's at, in the general vicinity, and we can talk about it. If I have a problem in my life, I can open the book and I know where to go to find, again, a reminder on that particular thing so I can adjust my life and I can practice the peaceful solution. And that's what I suggest that we do. It doesn't help just to memorize words. It doesn't hurt to do that. And it doesn't hurt to have those words in your mind, and it doesn't hurt to be able to go right to the page too. I know some who can that also practice the peaceful solution too. So I'm not saying that that's not the thing to do, but I'm saying that what's more important is knowing where to look for those reminders, where to look for what you might have forgotten, where to get the knowledge of how to conduct yourself. And don't forget, there are people you can ask also. There's other people practicing the peaceful solution. There's teachers of the peaceful solution that you can ask at any time. But anyways, let's go on back let's go on over to page, we'll look at the bottom of page 74 first. It says, you handle anger appropriately when you choose to proceed by behaving respectfully and morally, even when you're angry. So even when you're angry, even when something you don't agree with. And I just wanted to, got a picture here I wanted to show if I can find it. Oh boy. Yeah, I thought I had a picture here I wanted to show, I guess. Huh. Okay, well, another time, I guess. Okay, well, anyways, let's go on over to, let's go back first of all to the lesson plan. Lesson plan 3, page D, and procedure number 7, it says, tell students that there are other appropriate ways to deal with anger. and instruct students to read the section Appropriate Ways to Deal with Anger, found on page 75 through 77. So we've gotten the missing page there, page number 74. We've covered that and gone over a few things. So page 75 through 77, it says review each point separately and stress that by incorporating these tips as part of your anger management plan, notice it's a plan, they are learning to respond to anger in a healthy, effective manner. Let's go to page 75, but remembering, in all this, remembering guarding your mind, and remembering your anger style, remembering to look at your triggers, what triggers these things. When you go off and you look back and say, man, why did I do that? Which you're going to do it, that it's going to occur from time to time. Remember, curveballs and pitfalls in the character unit, general vicinity, about halfway in the book, page 85. So page 85, curveballs and pitfalls. Remember that things are going to take place that you thought you were prepared for. You thought you had your mind set in advance. Over on page 80, just a few pages before that, set your mind in advance, and you've got it all set. You're ready for anything coming your way, and boom! Here comes that curveball or pitfall, man, and it gets you, and then you look and say, oh, man, why did I say that? Why did I do that, Well, you can go back again, and you can look at where something might be taking place. You're not guarding your mind well enough. Have you not really looked at what your anger style is? Do you not really know what your triggers are? These aren't just words. We have to go back and figure out these things. And I admit, I read The Peaceful Solution many times before it hit me that, oh, wait a minute. Oh, we have to actually do these things that it says. If it says determine your anger style, then it means determine your anger style. That you're not going to get it until you do. So if you haven't done it, let's do it, do it today. Do it when you go home. Stop and do it, really. I understand completely. Believe me. I had read all the Peaceful Solution books and was teaching them and everything. And one day it just struck me that, oh, I don't have to just read this, I have to do it, So let's do it now. I mean, that's the way to do it, okay? Page 75. Speak appropriate ways to deal with anger. Speak in a respectful tone of voice and use respectful words. Speak in as a normal tone of voice as you can. I know someone, actually he's one of the teachers and that you see up here from time to time, and I know he always has a pretty normal tone of voice when it comes with dealing with frustration and everything. And so I've used that as an example for myself in trying to do that. I haven't achieved that point of perfection yet. Occasionally the tone kind of busts off there, but I'm trying. And I know all of you are being here learning to teach the Peaceful Solution. Remember, it's an ongoing process. And, I always revert back to the curveballs and pitfalls, setting your mind in advance and giving yourself room to grow. I mean, what awesome things to learn. Those things right there will help you more than anything well, I can't say more than anything. One of the things that will help you more than anything is guarding what you're putting into your mind. If you're putting negativity into your mind, you can expect that negativity to come out. So if we're doing that, let's change that. Let's change it today also, I might have found my pictures. Yeah, here it is. Okay. So, in other words, don't start screaming, yelling, or shouting. Raising your voice will only add to your angry feelings and could, if the other person does not have self-control, cause an angry response. The cursing, name-calling, threatening to hurt the other person has got to be eliminated out of your life. That's not the Peaceful Solution, okay? All it tells the other person is that you're angry and you do not respect them, and really you don't even respect them as a human being. Everybody deserves respect. Every human being deserves respect. Not only human beings, but animals too, don't get me wrong. Rather than resort to these unhealthy ways, take the time to respectfully explain why you're angry, if you can. You know, again, there are ways to deal with things, and you might have to back off for a minute and come back when things calm down. And there are appropriate times when you can walk away from a situation, and there's times that you wouldn't be wanting to walk away from a situation. If you have an authority, parent or something, you don't just turn and walk away and say, "Hey, forget you, I'll come back later." You can't do that. That doesn't work to your benefit. So rather than resort to these unhealthy ways, take the time to explain. This will give the other person an opportunity to resolve any hurt feelings and work on a peaceful solution that you can both live with. I did want to get to this I language thing. That's the second section there. It says, use I language to communicate your feelings. Many times when we feel angry, communicating our feelings helps to resolve the situation. Using I statements like, not I want this and I want that, but things like, I feel angry instead of you make me angry, or I'm upset instead of you make me so upset. It lets the other person know how you're feeling in a non-threatening way. I language opens the door to finding a peaceful solution. You language, on the other hand, includes, you make me so mad, look what you did, and all these things. They're verbal attacks. That's what you're doing. You're lashing out and attacking and casting blame on the other person. There doesn't always have to be blame put on a situation. When you blame somebody like this, it causes that person to react defensively. No one wants to be the problem. No one wants to be the blamed party, the attacked party. And it causes the situation to escalate. Using the I statement shows that you take responsibility for your feelings and desire to work out the problem peacefully. This is what we've got to get out of our lives, is this wanting to blame and wanting to fight and wanting to argue. Arguing is like this right here, if we could have the overhead for a moment. That's how you look when you're arguing and no, it's mine. No, it's mine. That's what you look like. Okay, get that picture. We look pretty stupid when we're doing that. I was trying to come up with something that, of course, I can't really top that example that Catan gave of being calm and everything. But I was thinking to myself, a calm picture I could kind of relate to, and I thought that picture right there was pretty calm, sitting by the water and the sun going down or coming up or whatever it might be, and whether the marble or whatever that is there or not. But I know it is calming to a lot of people. To one of the greatest teachers ever in the world enjoyed sitting next to the water, and it had a very calming effect. And so if you have that opportunity, I encourage you to, if you're thinking about things and all, it really does help to seek out a very calm place that you can kind of call your own, I'd like to thank everybody for, I guess we'll be beginning on page 75 there, towards the bottom, and the next teacher will be David. So I'll see you again if you come on Wednesday. That's on the 27th. The next class is 4/27/22 at 5:30 p.m. We look forward to seeing everybody here again. Thank you for coming. And, once again, hey, let's start tonight on some of these things. Don't wait. I mean, it really is real. Look at what it says in the book and then determine in your mind, set your mind in advance to go ahead and do it. That's the only way it's going to change, all right? So, all right, thank you.